Lyme disease in of itself is a fascinating story. I've actually been involved with it since its early discovery in the 1980s. And Minnesota, Wisconsin was a big focus of the upper Midwest. And this is a story that I think you'll find interesting, is that even though it was discovered primarily in the eastern part of the United States, named after Lyme, Connecticut, it's a disease that actually probably originated in the upper Midwest. And I tell you that because it turns out that there is a focus in northern Wisconsin and east central Minnesota where there's Lyme disease, there's another disease called anaplasmosis, there's another disease, babesia, etc., that all seem to have a similar kind of tick, human, deer kind of component. And back in the CCC days of the 1930s, the white-tailed deer population had been virtually totally depopulated from the Northeast. And so they actually trapped deer in northern Wisconsin and took them out and deposited them in New York and Connecticut and so forth.
Wow.
And most of those deer are actually deer that, today, their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather came from Wisconsin.
Wow.
And guess what? When you move deer, you move ticks. In fact, I was involved with a study that the Wisconsin Division of Health did, and a colleague of mine, the late Jeff Davis, where up in northern Wisconsin, as deer would come into the check station, they would actually measure the number of ticks that were attached to the nape of the neck, okay? And they had a thing drawn. And they asked hunters who were driving back to Madison and Milwaukee if they would be willing to check in at a station down there for just a second, and then they were going to count the ticks again. And it turned out that as the vehicles come rolling down from Highway 51 from northern Wisconsin, get on the Interstate 9094 and go to Milwaukee or Madison, the ticks just kept falling off. By the time they got to Madison or Milwaukee, the ticks were almost all gone. Well, guess, lo and behold, where all the Lyme disease and so forth started to show up, right along the interstate corridor.
Wow.
Because the ticks were coming off, and then they were getting into the local deer in that population. And so it's exactly what you said. The ticks are moving. They're moving. Okay, they've moved, and they're now infected. So I think that this Lyme disease issue is a key one. Lyme disease is really an important disease. It's real, no question about it. The challenge we have is that there's a lot of people that assume that they have chronic Lyme infection. And, the data on that is just really, really not there to support that these people are chronically infected. But they do have an immune response, likely, that occurs where it sets up this trigger. And so they're sick. They actually have something. But it's not treating it again for the bacteria infection. It's the fact that this body, your own body's immune system, as we've talked about several times today, it starts attacking you. So I think it's a similar picture we see with chronic fatigue syndrome. Same kind of thing. These people really are sick. They really do have problems. But it's not something you can treat. So when people, I have a challenge because when people take IV antibiotics at extended periods of time for Lyme disease, the data, there's 4 different studies now that have been done where people have had what we call a double-blind placebo-controlled trial where half got the drug, half got IV, but no drug. And it turned out all 4 of these studies in Lyme disease, the people who got just the placebo did just the same as the people who got the drug. And I worry that we're using antibiotics a lot there, and this is where I just mentioned earlier about Clostridium difficile. We actually had a patient in Minnesota that died from the IV treatment for what was chronic Lyme disease and wouldn't have been helpful. And so we need a lot more research in this area to figure out what are these people getting? What is it that we can shut off so that they don't have this chronic Lyme disease picture, knowing that it's not actually just you got to treat them more. Treatment's not going to help them with the antibiotics anymore. And so I think that's an area that we just need a lot more work in. And the numbers are growing, as you know.
Yeah. So we don't know what's happening?
Well, we have enough data to say your immune system is really cranked up. Right. Your immune system is, it's
reacting
just
to something.
Yeah, it's like rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of things. Thank God for our immune system. It's what fights off all the bad things we have. But sometimes that immune system gets turned on too much.
Yeah.
And then it takes on us, okay? Yeah. And it goes back to the coronavirus. That's why a lot of these people are dying right now, is this overvigorous immune response. And Lyme disease is kind of that same inciting event where we have evidence now that you could be infected with the bacteria, but if we treat you, it's like every other bacteria. You can really get rid of it. But you still have this chronic illness that's occurring. And what I think is hard is that we see people who have this who are desperate to have somebody understand what they have, and they end up going to people who take real advantage of them, clinicians who charge them an arm and a leg for things that are not going to help them. And what we need is a lot more research on what is actually going on and what kind of drugs can we use to reverse this immune system disorder.
I have a friend of mine who's a UFC fighter, Jim Miller, and he's got Lyme disease, and it's pretty bad. And he takes a stack of pills. I don't know what he takes every day.
Yeah.
What do you think someone is taking, and what benefit would they get from that?
I couldn't tell. I mean, I'm not, without knowing what it's there. But again, more often than not, if he's been adequately treated, it's not that the bacteria is still growing in him like it might be for a lot of it.
It's an autoimmune
It's
response.
an autoimmune, which is real. I mean, that's the other thing is I think these people just want to be legitimized and said, I'm really sick.
Right.
And it's not something I'm, mentally ill about, whatever. But then we've got to figure out what it is that you have. And
so we really don't know.
We don't know yet. We don't know.
Wow, but it's been around for so long.
I know, but this is where we need a lot more research about this in terms of what is it that's making these people like this. And this is really important.
And is there anything they can do to eradicate the ticks?
This is another thing you'll find interesting. In Minnesota, prior to the arrival of the first white men, the Native Americans burnt much of our state all the time. The prairies through much of the territory, and even in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, we had the classic, pine forest. Fire would wipe through. And with that, it would open up so much of the forest that you'd have a very different kind of mammals, population, deer, et cetera, et cetera. And with the suppression of fire, what's happened is we now have, instead of having these old growth forests, we have all this younger, non-pine or any kind of, like the oak trees of the upper Midwest are all disappearing because oak trees need sunlight. And fire is what they were very resistant to fire. And so the old oak forests and so forth would survive because of fire. Whereas today, with no fire, the elms and the maples and everything else comes in and the buckthorn and all that kind of stuff and takes over. So what's happening is, in our state of Minnesota, is we have a really good example of this is we're losing our moose. And the big primary reason is brainworm. Brainworm. It's a type of parasite that's common in white-tailed deer but causes no problems. In moose, it actually causes a brain infection and it kills them. And guess why it's happening? Because the deer range has moved farther and farther north in Minnesota.
Try to keep this.
I'm sorry. Yep. The has moved farther in northern Minnesota because of lack of fire, because the forest is changing. So now, where there only used to be moose, we're seeing deer and moose, and where that intersection is, we're starting to see moose develop this brainworm infection because it's from the deer. So the tick population has changed too, and it's largely due to the fire, lack of fire in many places. In the Northeast, never used to be like it was. We had fire all the time that would clear out these areas, and it was just part of natural everything. So one of the challenges we have with ticks is they're here. We're not going to change how we live, suburbs and trees and all of that.
Could controlled burns eliminate a lot of them?
They do, because what they do is they just don't eliminate the ticks, but what they do is they eliminate, for example, the white-field mice or all these different species that are important to the ticks. And then they bring in different species that will be there. So, this is a big debate in Minnesota right now. We're losing all these moose to brainworm. Ironically, the moose population is expanding dramatically in Isle Royale. Why? Because there's no deer out there. And so they're not getting brainworm out there. So people have said, we're going to lose our moose. Well, it's the deer. So fire actually has helped the moose. In areas of northern Minnesota where there's been a lot of fire, the moose population's growing, because the deer are not there, because exactly those mammals, those rodents and so forth are very different in burnt-out areas than they are in non-burnt-out areas.
Well, they do control burns in some states. I had a friend who was hunting in Washington State a couple of years ago, and he said it was really weird because there's these massive fires in the distance that were actually being controlled. They do it on purpose.
Yeah, which is a lot better than having the out-of-control fires where you have so much fuel.
Yeah.
And, if you haven't had a forest fire in 8,500 years in an area, the fuel in there is huge.
Yeah.
And so actually they do that in northern Minnesota too. They're doing controlled burns. And in the prairies, of course, we do controlled burns all the time. So,
but the problem with the East Coast is you're dealing with a lot of these sort of almost residential areas
Yeah,
that have
yeah.
all these ticks.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, and there you can't. There we have to find ways that's where we really have to have vaccines and treatments for these diseases. We're not going to get rid of the ticks. So what we have to do is figure out. Wouldn't it be incredible if we have a cocktail vaccine for, babesia, for Lyme disease, and that's what we need.
Is there any kind of an animal that eats ticks?
Birds, birds will eat them.
But not enough.
Not enough.
They're not
No,
doing their
no,
job.
they're doing very well. Thank you. Ticks do very well, and that's another issue. For some of the larger mammals, as you know, tick predation can get so heavy, particularly in certain times of the year, that really, literally, it takes a lot of blood out of these large animals, even though they're so big.
Yeah,
that's a lot
I
of
went
blood.
down a rabbit hole the other day online, and I saw this one deer that was covered in these frisbee-sized patches of ticks.
That's exactly
They were
it.
all swollen.
And they're full of blood.
Oh, so disgusting.
And it happens day after day. So it is a hit on them. It's a real hit on them.
Should pull up a picture of that just to freak people out that are watching online. Just they need to see this.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
It's one of those things, though, when you talk about ticks and you talk about Lyme disease, most people, their eyes glaze over. They don't even care. It's not affecting me until someone in your family has it.
Yep.
There's a guy that I know who was a former UFC fighter, Marcus Davis, who his wife got Lyme disease, and he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to help her and do something about it, and treatments and all these different things for it.
Yeah. It's a real challenge. It's a challenge. And this is another area, again, when you think of the amount of money we lose in just lost time, let alone pain and suffering, what an investment to make in this. I mean, this is the kind of thing, and this is where infectious diseases really need a renaissance. I mean, we can do a lot here.
We pulled up a chart of the United States where they showed the areas that are affected by these ticks and what percentage of ticks carry Lyme disease they've tested. And some places in the Northeast, it's in the 60%.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's huge.
That's
and
so
it's
scary.
And it's growing.
Yeah.
I mean, you understand how wildlife has changed. I mean, to think that we have all these wild coyote populations in New York City now.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing how
every
animals.
single city in the country.
What the rats aren't doing, the coyotes are taking over, and it's a challenge. I mean, these are infectious disease issues too. They're very real.
Yeah, they have coyotes in Central Park.
They do. Yeah, absolutely.
They have them in the Bronx. They have them in. I mean, it's weird. It's weird to see because this is something that just didn't exist before. Look at it. There it is. That's
for a good one,
that's
but,
okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. That's not the best I've seen, but it's gross enough.
Yeah, it is. It gives you a good sense of it, though. Yeah.
Dan Flores, who has been a guest on the podcast before, has a great book called Coyote America that sort of details how this came to be and how these coyotes have. Look at that all over that poor deer's face.
Look at that! Look at the eye! Look at the eye in the fawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're disgusting.
Yeah. They are.
But coyotes, about how when they got rid of the wolves and they tried to do the same to the coyote, they just actually expanded their territory. They're sneaky, very clever little animals.
Adaption.
Yeah.
Just like microbes, adaption.
Yeah. Why China?
Because they have this incredibly large population, 2 billion. They've got this food supply that is largely wildlife that comes into these markets where there's this incredible contact between people and these animals. And the crowded nature of that society. I mean, I think one of the things that surprises people when they go to China, 15 million population cities are common over there. I mean, we think of the United States, we think of L.A. and New York, and that's big, okay? Over there, I mean, in Wuhan, a city of 15 million, the entire metropolitan area is 60 million. And so you have people crowded so closely together that if you add in the bugs coming from these animals, and then the potential for this kind of contact where it spreads quickly, China has been a bacterial and viral soup vessel for a long time. That's, again, why we have to protect ourselves here, because a bug anywhere in the world today can be a bug everywhere tomorrow. Everywhere.
Right. And particularly when you're dealing with a massive number like these kind of cities.
Yeah.
So these they call them wet markets?
Yep,
Is that what they
wet
call
markets,
them?
yep.
So that's what it is. A lot of it is wildlife?
Oh, it's incredible. I've hunted my life. I love to fly fish. I love the outdoors. Okay, I could never have imagined the animals. I've spent time in these markets. I remember one day spending a day in the Bangkok, Thailand market, and it was about a mile by a mile and a half wild big. I mean, in these tight aisles. every animal imaginable to humans. And I swear to God, there were some out of the movies, I think, that were in there. And they're all just right on top of each other. And I actually have a picture that I show in some of my lectures. There was a situation where there was all these chickens in a cage, I don't know, 15 or 20 of them, okay, in a big wire cage. And it sat on top of a wire cage full of ferrets. And ferrets are actually an animal model from flu standpoint that they do really well in getting infected with flu viruses. If you wanted to create the perfect experiment that no university, research group would let you do, is you'd put birds and ferrets like that together. And that's just common. That's just common. That's common.
And so birds and ferrets together, it's something that's infecting the birds could jump to the ferrets or vice versa.
Ferrets could breathe it out and we could get infected.
Oh, Christ.
And so these markets, I don't know what's going to happen here, but for the first time, we really saw the Chinese, after this outbreak in Wuhan, really start to put down some markers on what they're going to do to supervise these markets. I mean, they still have to eat, but I think this is a dangerous practice where we see it. But, it happens. Look at Africa with Ebola.
Right.
Bushmeat is still very important, and there's so much of the world that's their primary food supply.
And when they say bushmeat, it's basically everything.
Everything from bats. We think bat was the primary source of this outbreak in West Africa, was a human bat that was consumed. They eat them all the time.
Do they really?
Yeah. So, and some of them are pretty big bats. They're literally 3 feet wingspans. They're big. And so, that's one of the challenges we have with China. We know that this is going to happen. It's going to occur. We think of the flu viruses the same way. And that's why we need doing better flu vaccines. This could just as easily be a flu pandemic, the same thing, like 1918.
So these wet markets, they just have all these animals hanging out, and some of them are still alive. Is that what it is?
Many of them are alive. And then they'll actually prepare them for you right there. They basically kill them and gut them and so forth. You got some pictures up there.
Bizarre Wuhan West
there you go.
Wet Market menu shows over 100 wild animals sold as food. Link with virus unclear.
Exactly.
That's what it looks like. And here, I'll show you the list so you can read it.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Let's see some images. Whoa, look at that Look at that list.
I know.
Peacocks.
Yeah.
People are eating peacocks?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Deer, crocodiles, turkeys, swans. Eating swans. How dare you? Kangaroos, squirrels, snails, foxes.
And civet cats were the cause of the SARS outbreak.
Yeah. Ostriches. I've had that. Pretty delicious.
Yep.
I'm a hypocrite. Look at me eating ostriches. Centipedes, geese, hedgehogs, goats. Jesus.
So, it's a challenge.
That's a pheasant, right? That's normal.
Yeah, it's just a picture of it.
So, do we have a video of the market? I want to see what... Whoa, look at that freaky-looking salamander. Look at the size of that sucker.
Big. Yep.
That's a huge salamander.
I went light for you first. The pictures I was finding dark.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Come on. What do you got?
Cages of turtles and cages of bunnies.
Let's
and
see it.
all sorts of
Let's see it.
All right. Bam.
Wow, this wet market is very, very strange. So, and these are enormous markets, right?
Oh, they're huge. They're huge. And the number of people in them is incredible. I mean, there
where
are
are
many.
they getting the animals from? They're getting them from the wild?
From rural areas, yeah.
And are they growing these things and farming them, or are they
Some
just
cases
catching
both.
them?
Some cases both. Like a lot of the seafood today is actually being farmed.
So this is really like a giant petri dish.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, wow.
Fish.
You're looking, that fish looks not
Yep.
that fresh. Whoa, what's all that stuff? Rabbits and
Rabbits.
I couldn't tell you what all that.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But you're getting
They're
an
just
idea
laying them on the ground.
of why, if we can't stop that, we surely can try. But if we can't stop that, we need to stop the infectious diseases coming from those animals to us.
Look at them all wearing masks. That's hilarious.
That was, I think, with the outbreak. Was that might have been since the
Are
outbreak.
those gigantic things a mollusk? What is that? What are those things?
Can't tell.
Those look like giant
They
mollusks.
also like flat
Yeah, they
turtle
are,
shells or
right?
something.
Because
I
look,
can't tell the difference.
no, because look at the ones
you're right.
behind. They look
Yeah,
like,
I think you're right.
You're right.
they look like huge mussels.
Yep.
Wow, look at those suckers behind them. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of people in China. They got to eat. That's where it gets weird, right? It's like, how do you tell them that they've been doing this for who knows how long? How do you tell them to stop doing it? Or is that impossible, and is it more possible to just accelerate our vaccine program and try to preemptively create something to address coronaviruses, to address various different... Brian Richards, your friend, wildlife biologist, and Well, we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this scary disease that, well, when Ted Nugent was on the podcast, he downplayed the consequences and effects of something called CWD, or chronic wasting disease, which has made it onto your farm. And you live in Wisconsin, and you have this beautiful place that we visited when we did the Meat Eater television show. And this is a new thing, that this chronic wasting disease was decimates the deer's health and kills them. And the suspicion is that some of this, at least, comes from these high fence operations where people grow deer and treat them like, instead of like a wild animal, they treat them like a domesticated animal and have them all feeding off of the same pile of food, and they share this disease. Is this all correct and accurate, Brian?
Boy, you just started out about an hour's worth of conversation. So, yeah, just a little bit. I'm a wildlife biologist with the National Wildlife Health Center, U.S. Geological Survey up in Madison, Wisconsin. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is chronic wasting disease. I wouldn't say that makes me necessarily an expert, but I've gotten to know a lot of people that I would call experts over the years. So I've gained a little bit of knowledge. So I don't even, your statement there, we could start a number of different places.
Yeah. This disease, it essentially... describe what it does to these animals and why it's such a major concern. It hasn't jumped to humans yet.
That we're aware of.
Correct. But it is a possibility, a very real possibility.
We can't rule it out at this point in time. Science is unable to rule it out. So, okay, that's a great place to start. Why would we care about this thing called chronic wasting disease? And I would argue, and some other scientists have argued, there's two major reasons. Number one is the impacts of this disease on members of the deer family themselves. And the other is that we cannot rule out the possibility that CWD could become a human health issue at some point down the road. Okay, so you kind of nailed those two. With regard to deer, or members of the deer family, white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, and most recently it's picked up in reindeer in Norway, of all places. We could articulate some reasons, some rationale why this disease might be thought of as being important. The first we'd look at would be geographic spread. So, CWD 20 years ago was thought to be this really novel thing in a very restricted geographic range in southeastern Wyoming, adjacent northeastern Colorado, and maybe a little spillover into Nebraska. Wildlife biologists, wildlife disease specialists looked at this disease. It was interesting. We didn't know much about it at that point in time, but it seemed to be very isolated there.
What does it do to the deer?
It kills deer. Okay?
Right, but how does it kill them?
All right, so this is a member of a family of diseases called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs. So big, long words. Transmissible means it can go from animal A to animal B. Spongiform means looks like a sponge, and encephalopathy means disease of the brain. So you put it together, and so this disease results in holes in the brain, resulting in progressive neurological degeneration followed by death. Okay? It's a death sentence for
And there's no
deer.
cure for it? It's not like you can capture the deer and give them some sort of medication?
No cure for these diseases. The suite of diseases, there's members of this TSE group of diseases in humans. Most familiar is one called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease.
Right. So it's very similar to mad cow disease.
They're in the same family.
So it
that's
comes
one
from
that's in
prions?
Well, I'd say prions. You could say prions.
Sorry, I don't know how to say it. I'll just
no
read
worries.
it.
That's an interesting, there's it goes back and forth on whether it's prion or prion. Stan Proisner, who received a Nobel laureate for his work on these diseases, coined the term prion. Mm-hmm. And in his first publication describing these diseases, he did a phonetic spelling, and it's prion. So other researchers, it's especially some from across the pond, say it's got to be prion. And the main reason that some of them I've talked to about that is that it irks Stan Proisner when he hears it called prion.
Oh, so we'll say prion.
Yeah.
So I'll say prion from now on. Now, this disease, which people know as mad cow disease, obviously is transmissible to humans. And that's one of the reasons why people are very scared that this could potentially jump from deer into humans. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it also is making its way into the actual plants that these animals eat.
You're correct on both accounts. So with BSE, mad cow disease, that was an interesting disease where it resulted from, in essence, turning cows into cannibals. We were
Which
recycling.
also exists in New Guinea, right? With cannibals,
with,
Jacob Creutzfeldt.
With kuru, which
Yeah.
is a human disease, TSE, likely started when one individual developed Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. That individual died. And as is was the practice in the Faroe tribe in Papua New Guinea, they practiced ritualized cannibalism to honor the dead and to help release the spirits from deceased family members. So they would feed upon the corpse and the bodies of their deceased. So when one individual died of probably some variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, then the causative agent, the prion protein, which is concentrated in the central nervous system and lymphatic systems of diseased patients, this was fed back to other members of the family and the extended family. And so when they got sick and died, fed it again. So we saw that with kuru. In the 1960 or around there, it was realized that this cannibalistic behavior was likely the result, or likely the cause of disease transmission. Cannibalism was outlawed. And at that point in time, you broke completely the disease transmission cycle. So no more new cases of kuru, but they had lingering cases with an extended incubation period up to 40 years later before kuru finally burned out of that population.
Whoa.
So now with BSE, or mad cow disease, we were doing exactly, in essence, the same thing. Not exactly the same thing, but in essence. So in an effort to maximize production and reduce the amount of waste, when they butchered cattle, we would take all the offal, OFFAL, the hide, the bones, the parts that are inedible, and we would render them, cook them at high temperature and typically, high pressure as well, and it turns into a slurry, a high-protein slurry. You skim the fat off the top of that and then dehydrate the rest of it, and you have, kind of a meat and bone meal, a high-protein supplement, realizing that cattle grow faster and produce better when on a higher protein diet. It seemed reasonable to use waste material from cows to feed back to cows.
Oof.
So at some point, turning
doesn't get better, Joe.
turning cows into cannibals.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, a cow developed a TSE, a prion disease. Whether it came from scrapie, the TSE of sheep, or arose on its own is unknown. But that cow died. It was rendered into meat and bone meal, and this high-protein feed was then fed out to hundreds to thousands.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but these prions, they could survive up to more than 1,000-degree temperature.
Yeah, surviving is kind of a strange term, Joe, in that they're not alive to start with. It's a protein. They can persist. They cannot be inactivated. So, yeah, you'd have to cook pretty hot.
These prions are not necessarily a living thing like a disease or a virus or a bacteria.
Well, they're a disease-causing agent, but they are incredibly unique. So they're an etiologic agent, like a virus, a bacteria, or a parasite could be causing disease. But all these other things have genetic material. They're alive, which allows them to change rapidly, to evolve over time. So the whole concept that you have a protein that all mammals produce in a normal form, can be converted after production into a disease-associated form that has these radically different characteristics. One that you mentioned was, resistance to heat treatment. A normal prion protein, and we have billions of them circulating in our bodies right now, have a specific purpose, a cellular purpose. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's likely involved in some sort of intracellular communication. It's a string of around 250 amino acids, so a relatively short protein. It does whatever it does, and then the body recycles, breaks that chain of amino acids down into its component parts, and recycles it. Turns out that normal cellular prion protein likely has a half-life of maybe 4 to 6 hours. Okay, so you're producing them relatively constantly. Then there's the disease-associated form, and all disease-associated prions start as the normal cellular prion. So they're converted from one three-dimensional form to a different form, okay? And this different form has these radically different characteristics. One is heat resistance, another is UV light resistance. I mentioned that the normal cellular prion protein has a half-life of maybe 4 to 6 hours. The disease-associated ones can persist in the environment for years and potentially up to decades. Okay?
And when you say persist in the environment, you mean in like on the ground, on leaves, on like how would they persist?
Yeah, all of those things, Joe. So if a deer sheds infectious agent, this prion protein, and so from the time a deer is infected, it's probably around 2 years before it develops clinical signs of disease, goes downhill, loses its fear of humans, dramatic weight loss, all of those things. That incubation period, it's probably shedding infectious agent for the vast majority of that time period. So it looks healthy, but it's able of transmitting disease. We'd call that, a typhoid Mary syndrome.
The 2 deer that that were positive on our farm, 2 bucks, 2.5-year-old bucks, we had them tested, as you know, for the last several years we've been getting, initially we got our only bucks tested, and then the last 3 or 4 years we've gotten all the deer tested. They were 2.5-year-old bucks, looked perfectly healthy.
And these are the first ones that you tested that
tested positive. When we tested in excess of 35 deer over the last, more than that, probably more like 50.
During the incubation period, would they still test positive?
At some point they will.
At some point. So they could be spreading infectious agents without testing positive?
Yes.
Oh,
absolutely.
Fuck.
So it's probably between 3 and 6 months out when we can test an animal test positive. But it's likely shedding infectious agent, at least at lower quantities, prior to that point in time. And so it's shedding infectious agent. It's capable of transmitting disease, okay, long before it looks clinically ill. And so that's one of the real challenges with this disease from a management standpoint. They look perfectly healthy. They act perfectly healthy. But they're starting to have that progressive neurological degeneration that we can only see very near the end of disease.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like we could potentially be facing a ticking time bomb of many, many, many deer that are wandering around out there right now that look totally normal, that are spreading this stuff all over the place, and they're acting normal, they look perfectly healthy. And then, obviously, with this multi-year incubation period, this could just cascade.
And I think we've seen evidence of that now. Started out, we talked about being isolated disease. It was picked up in Wisconsin at the end of 2001. As of today, CWD has now been picked up in 25 states in captive and or free-ranging populations in white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, or moose, 2 Canadian provinces. In addition, it was picked up in South Korea. And that was real interesting. It was in captive elk, and those elk still had Canadian ear tags in them. So we pretty much know how CWD, those elk didn't swim across the Pacific Pond. Most recently, it was picked up 2 years ago in free-ranging reindeer in Norway. And subsequent to that, it was picked up in a small handful, like 3 or 4 moose and a red deer in Norway and a single moose in Finland. It's a real concern over in Norway with reindeer. Okay, so reindeer are very gregarious. White-tailed deer,
caribou, same.
Caribou reindeer. So not unusual to see them in herds of hundreds of animals. So very, very different than what we see with white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, or moose. We don't see those huge herds. Well, with elk you can in the wintertime. But anyway, it's thought that this gregarious behavior might really facilitate transmission in reindeer. Right? So when it was picked up in reindeer, Norway said, maybe we should do something. It's an interesting story in that, Norway's got experience with scrapie in sheep. And so they have a long history of...
What is scrapie?
Scrapie is the same as, it's the same family of diseases in sheep. It's actually the first one that was described, scrapie, we've known about since the early 1700s. A disease of domestic sheep. And it's called scrapie because of the behavior of these animals once they enter the clinical phase of disease display. And they seem like they itch bad. And so they'll go up to fence posts and other objects, and they'll literally rub their hide off of their body. So that's the name scrapie. And it's the same progressive neurological disorder followed by death. And you think about it. So as this disease creates vacuoles in the brain, it's killing off neurons. And so without those neurons firing, you fall into that progressive degeneration. And yet at some point, your body can no longer survive. And that's what's really spooky about how this thing kills. So anyway, go back to Norway. When they detected CWD...
Brian, try to keep this a little bit closer to you. Sorry, you're very soft-spoken.
Oh, no worries. I can hear myself plenty loud.
I know. It's just that the problem is the recording. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So when they picked up CWD in reindeer in Norway, the researchers over there had witnessed what our lack of success on this side of the pond over the course of the last 20 years. They took it very, very seriously. So they took kind of some harsh medicine. They announced their plans that they were going to eliminate a herd unit. They were going to kill every reindeer in an entire herd unit in Norway. The idea is to eliminate the host population. It's called stamping out, and it works in a pen. This is the first time it'd been done realistically in a free-ranging population. The whole idea is we don't have effective tools for management of disease. They were very fearful of what would happen if this spread throughout that reindeer population and throughout other reindeer herds.
And like Alaska, they have multiple herds. Like last year I hunted caribou with Steve up in the 40 Mile River area. But there were, and so they're very localized is probably not, but at least they have a range that they move through. So, and in Norway they have 2 or 3 different herds.
Many more than that. So I don't know exactly how many
but
herd
the point
units
was
they
is
have.
that you could isolate one of the herds.
So the idea is before this gets to be any worse, before it gets any farther, let's take it out. So they had a hunting season. They allowed hunters to take as many as they could, which was a little over 1,000 reindeer. Then they came in with government agents.
But isn't there a
sharpshooters.
concern that the hunters could eat something with CWD and then catch it?
Well, that's always a concern. But we can talk about human
Yeah.
health. Let me finish this one up, though, with Norway. In that, so they literally took the bull by the horns. They decided to do what was very unpopular, what we have not been able to do in North America. And so after the hunting season, government agents, sharpshooters, took an additional 1,400 reindeer. So they killed every reindeer in this herd unit, and they're going to keep it fallow, allow no reindeer in there for a minimum of 5 years. So this has every bit of promise of being the first large-scale success with dealing with this disease in a free-ranging herd. Pretty different than what we've been able to accomplish over here.
In them.
What?
It's not, I mean, it's some sort of chemical, no?
No, they're antigens, right? They're
What's the fluid?
Macromolecules.
What's the liquid stuff?
Typically, it would be saline or salt water. And
Right. Now, what is missing from today's vaccine protocol, if anything?
in terms of diseases we should be vaccinating for, but we're not.
Is there anything?
Yeah, there certainly are. One of them is a big problem among young infants, especially premature infants, called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus infection.
What does that come from?
It's a respiratory virus that peaks around the same time that flu does, so it's a very severe respiratory illness. So this is, again, one of those vaccines that's not a big money maker. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is trying to provide grants for supporting that one. That's a good one. And then there are all the diseases that affect poor people, both in developing countries and even among the poor in the United States.
That
that
was
we're
the
trying to make
subject of this book?
That's the next one called
Yeah.
Blue Marble Health.
The next one. So this is not released yet?
No, this is out. This
Okay.
actually preceded this one.
Now, this book is all about poor people and infectious diseases and the rise of these infectious diseases even in the United States.
That's right. So, when we think about I led this big campaign to raise awareness of something called neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs. These are the most common afflictions of people living in poverty. I call them the most important disease you've never heard of. There are diseases like schistosomiasis and Chagas disease and leishmaniasis, and have been devoting my life to seeing if we could develop vaccines for those diseases in the nonprofit sector, because the big pharmaceutical companies just aren't going to take these on. So we're trying to do it in the nonprofit sector. But this book, the Blue Marble Health book, came out of some number crunching that I did using data from the World Health Organization, or something called the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, which is based in Seattle, Washington, that found something very surprising, and that is most of the world's poverty-related diseases are not necessarily in the poorest, most devastated countries of Africa, meaning like Democratic Republic of Congo or Central African Republic. They're there, but on a numbers basis, most of these poverty-related diseases are actually in the G20 economies, the 20 wealthiest economies, together with Nigeria, which is not a G20 country, but has an economy bigger than the bottom 3 or 4. So that was pretty amazing for me to find that out, because, at first I didn't believe the numbers, because I said, well, how could it be if they're poverty-related diseases? Why are they in the 20 wealthiest economies? And then I realized that it's among the poor living in wealthy countries. So the poorest of the rich today now account for most of the world's poverty-related diseases.
And what's the cause of this?
So why the link with poverty?
Yes.
So that's so one of the things I do in the book is I ask that, well, what is it about poverty that's making you susceptible? I don't think we really know. I mean, clearly in some cases, if you live in poor, dilapidated housing without window screens, things like mosquitoes and kissing bugs and sandflies can get inside the house. Or if you look in poor neighborhoods, like in and around Houston, you see a lot of environmental degradation around the neighborhood. You see discarded tires that breed Aedes aegypti mosquito or standing water. But I don't think...
What did the tires do? Discarded tires?
So one of the best habitats for the mosquito that transmits dengue and Zika and chikungunya and yellow fever are discarded tires. That's what they love. Living. So this, if you go into poor neighborhoods, you'll see a lot of tire dumping, for instance, and those are habitats for that Aedes aegypti mosquito, including here in Southern California.
So is it when the water gets in the tire?
That's
and
right, a little bit of water.
Puddle?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I moved into a house once in Encino, down the street from here, in fact, and no one had lived in the house for about a year and a half, 2 years. And the pool had not been taken care of. And I went out into the pool, and it was green, and there were schools of mosquito
heaven. Mosquito heaven, yeah.
So strange.
So absolutely. You go into poor neighborhoods, abandoned swimming pools, things like that. That's where we're getting a number of these diseases.
Well, we don't have very many mosquitoes in Southern California. I mean, it's really kind of amazing in that regard.
Well, it depends. So, in some counties where they do aggressive spraying and things like that, you won't. But in many counties, you probably in some of the poorer counties, poorer districts, you still do.
Well, I mean, in terms of the way it is on the East Coast. Like, I grew up in Boston, and in the summertime, you just have fucking mosquitoes everywhere. Yeah. They just can't get away from them. And then I've been to Alaska, which is the craziest place I've ever been to in my life in terms of mosquitoes.
Right.
Have you been?
I haven't been to Alaska. But
it's hilarious. Yeah. You get out of your car, and they attack you like a horde of birds.
That's because they only get 1 month of the year to do it.
Yeah.
To have fun,
so they're super aggressive, and they're also very large.
The big problem is along the Gulf Coast of the U.S. We have that Aedes aegypti mosquito, and that's why I got so worried about Zika virus hitting the Gulf Coast of the U.S.
Yeah. Mosquitoes in other countries obviously contain malaria. I mean, we've been very fortunate that that's never made it over to here.
Well, no, we used to have malaria. Used to be widespread in the United States. Both the one that was a real killer disease called falciparum malaria on the Gulf Coast, and even up into Illinois in the Ohio River Valley, we had a lot of malaria.
When was this?
Caused by Vivax in the 1800s. In fact, there's a book written by Dickens when he visited the United States called Martin Chuzzlewit, when he describes all these sickly people in Illinois, in Cairo, Illinois, on the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio River. He's clearly describing malaria.
Wow, I did not know.
Yeah.
So what stopped it?
So that's a great question. So there's actually a very nice book written by a medical historian at Duke University named Margaret Humphreys called Malaria, Race, and Poverty. And she has a hypothesis, but I think she's onto something, that the malaria dropped in association with aggressive economic development. So that the FDR's New Deal included something called the Agricultural Adjustment Act that got people off with agrarian pursuits and put them into factories. Quality of housing went up, and that's probably what caused a lot of the reduction in these tropical diseases. Remember, they're really diseases of poverty. In fact, I spent a lot of time working in China, and I'm seeing that play out right now in China. China has had this very aggressive program of economic development, mostly in the eastern part of the country. But in the southwest part of the country, you go into Yunnan, Sichuan provinces, you go back in time 75 years, and you still see those diseases that are widespread.
Do you think that the best cure or the best way to stop malaria would be just to increase the economy of these areas in Africa where they're experiencing it?
Clearly, economic development is a very potent driver. Now, what it is about economic development, we still don't have our arms around that yet, but economic development is very important, just like for the neglected tropical diseases we studied. But, unfortunately for many countries, economic development is still decades away. So that's the rationale for developing these vaccines.
Is it because economic development moves people into more urban environments where there's less tropical diseases, period?
I think that's part of it, although now we're seeing some tropical diseases thrive in urbanized environments like, yellow fever and Zika and dengue as well. So it's not only urbanization. It has to be urbanization with good planning that's not done unchecked, that outstrips the infrastructure in terms of water and sanitation.
So this brings me to the thing that I wanted to talk to you about in the first place, because this is what you brought up to me when we were doing this sci-fi show, and you said something to me that has been haunting me ever since, that the vast majority of people that live in tropical climates have parasites.
Mm-hmm.
Vast majority.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
There's things like Toxoplasma gondii, and
so let's look at the hit parade. Right, the top one is one called Ascariasis, intestinal roundworm. The estimates are on 800 million people have Ascaris roundworms in their bellies.
Whoa!
So
800 million.
So more than 1 in 10 people on the planet, and mostly people who live in extreme poverty. 400 million have hookworm infection. 400 million have whipworms. A lot of these are wormy diseases. 200 million people with scabies, which is an ectoparasite on the skin that causes terrible itching and secondary bacterial infections. Schistosomiasis is another one. The point is, almost every single person who is in extreme poverty has one of these, what I call neglected tropical diseases. And one of the interesting features about them is they're very debilitating. They not only occur in the setting of poverty, but I think they reinforce poverty because they make people too sick to go to work.
Yes.
They actually shave. We can show they shave IQ points off of kids when they have them.
Well, this is the hookworm connection to the idea of the slack-jawed, dumb Southerner, right? In the United States of America.
Right. And now one of the things that we have found, so Rogelio Mejia on my faculty, working with an environmental activist named Catherine Coleman Flowers in Alabama, found that hookworm is still present in Alabama. So among the poor.
Explain that to people so they understand what we're talking about, because for the longest time there was this stereotype about people that lived in the South that they were dull-minded.
Right.
And that this could be directly connected to hookworm infection, which had run rampant.
Right. There was even the term given they called it the germ of laziness, that hookworm infection, because it causes severe anemia. So if you're walking around with terrible anemia, of course you're not feeling up to working a full day and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So hookworm was widely present in the southeastern United States at the turn of the 20th century. And then as malaria went down with economic development, so did hookworm infection as well. But we still have pockets in this country.
And this wasn't understood at the time, right? They didn't know that these people were infected with hookworm?
forever, no, up until very recently. So the cause of hookworm wasn't discovered till 1900.
What is that cause?
It's called Necator americanus, the American killer, and that's the name of the worm.
And this
It's
is
a
from
hook-
walking barefoot?
or that goes in through the hands, or enters all parts of the body.
But it's very common to get it from walking barefoot.
That's right.
Which was more common in the South.
right.
Warm weather.
And so that's one of the diseases we've made a vaccine for that's now in clinical trials.
Yeah, when I found that one out, I was like, oh my God, well, that's it. That totally makes sense.
Right.
Because for the longest time, there was that stereotype. And then when you find out that it's directly connected to a massive infection of this disease, this worm.
So these are the diseases that are holding back people who live in poverty.
Yes.
And originally, I thought only in places like the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, but now I realize it's these pockets of poverty across the entire planet that people are affected by these diseases.
And these diseases can be vaccinated.
That's
against.
we're trying to prove that we can make a vaccine against.
And there is a hookworm vaccine, right?
Right now in clinical trials. Yeah,
Just in clinical
that's
trials.
right. So we're seeing, if you look now at what are the big drivers of infectious diseases right now in not only in the U.S. but globally, there are really some interesting forces, and a lot of them are social determinants. So a big one is poverty. That's a huge one. The other big one is political instability and war, because it interrupts public health control measures. So, for instance, Venezuela, which was leading public health control in Latin America for decades, with the collapse of the economy in the Chavez era and now into the Maduro area, we've got a terrible situation where we've had measles return in a big way, so huge numbers of cases of measles. We've had all the neglected tropical diseases come back, as well as malaria, Chagas disease, leishmaniasis. So it's really interesting how that is destabilizing the whole region, because now Venezuela has one of the largest diasporas of people, as big as the diaspora coming out of Syria and Iraq. So now the diseases are moving into adjacent areas of Brazil and Colombia and Ecuador. And so it's really, and that's another big driver, is political instability. The third one we think is climate change may be very important. So, why did we see this big surge of chikungunya virus infection in the Western Hemisphere, or Zika? We don't really understand the forces of that. And what's going on in Southern Europe right now is quite concerning. We've had malaria return to Greece after it's been gone for 70 years. Malaria has returned to Italy. We're seeing schistosomiasis, a neglected tropical disease, on the island of Corsica. We've got dengue, chikungunya, West Nile virus across Italy, Spain, Portugal. So we're trying to understand why that is, and there's some thought that climate change may be a big driver of that.
Now, what other infectious diseases or parasites, rather, do they have vaccines for? Do they have a vaccine for toxo?
There's no vaccine for toxoplasmosis. There's a prototype malaria vaccine.
Prototype?
Yeah. Well, there's a malaria vaccine. It's called Mosquirix. That's the trade name. That was developed, supported with a lot of funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and working in partnership with GlaxoSmithKline. And that malaria vaccine now has been approved for use in children by the European Medicine Agency, and it's being introduced now in 3 countries in Africa: Malawi, Ghana, and I forgot the third one. I think it was Tanzania.
Is there an adverse reaction that people have to that stuff? Because I know the traditional malaria medication, I had friends that took it and had horrible nightmares.
Oh, yeah, malarium is
Yeah.
terrible, yeah. It gives you
Yeah.
very lurid dreams. And
Yeah.
no. And so far, no. I mean,
And so when you say children, how old are the children that they're vaccinating with this?
well, the problem that you get into with malaria is that before 6 months of age, you have maternal antibodies on board. You remember that you're born with antibodies from your mother, and those start to wane by 6 months of age. So the ones who get hospitalized with measles, what's called cerebral malaria, which is a devastating condition, or severe malaria anemia, which is also a killer, are those children between 6 months of age and 5 years of age. So those are the ones that we want to protect.
Now,
And it's one of the leading killers of children globally right now.
right,
And we don't have a vaccine.
sickle cell is connected to it, correct? Right, sickle cell it has something to do with people developing an immunity to malaria?
Yeah, I'm surprised you knew that.
I found out from Tiffany Haddish.
Who's Tiffany Haddish?
How dare you? She's a very funny comedian.
Okay. I'm sure she is, but she's right. It's not really.
I was like, wow.
It's not really immunity, but it's a natural protection. So individuals who have the sickle cell trait seem to be partially resistant to malaria, and that's the thinking why the gene for sickle cell has been preserved in Africa for so long, is because it does confer some protection against malaria. So it's a reason for keeping the gene in the gene pool.
Yeah, we were actually discussing it because a friend that I grew up with died from it. So it seems to only exist in African Americans or Africans. Is that correct?
No, there's some other places as well, but predominantly in Africa and among African Americans. So.
Or people whose ancestors came from these tropical climates where they possibly did.
Yeah, so it's really quite an amazing story.
So there's no vaccine for toxoplasmosis. Is there anything on the horizon? Is there anything being worked on? Because that's a big one, right?
It's a real big problem among people with HIV/AIDS, for instance. Because it reactivates your toxoplasmosis, and I even see it in kids sometimes. But the thinking is
reactivates it. How so?
Well, what happens is it's in some countries up to 30% of people are actually infected with toxoplasma. And the parasite has the ability to undergo a dormancy state in the body until your immune system gets compromised, either because of AIDS or because if you get some kind of medicine that suppresses your immune system, and then it can reactivate it and cause what's called cerebral toxoplasmosis, which is quite serious. So most people handle their toxoplasmosis very well. You die with it and don't even know you have it. But in some cases it gets reactivated. Right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of incentive for developing a toxoplasmosis vaccine, although I'd be very interested to work on something like that.
Why would there be no incentive? It's such a large-scale disease. It's hundreds of millions of people worldwide, right?
That's right. And part of the problem is we have almost no information on the actual number of people who have it and how extensive it is. So we call that disease burden. We don't have good disease burden estimates of toxoplasmosis.
I'm scared to get tested. I've had a bunch of cats. I've had feral cats.
Yeah,
and I'm crazy.
Well, there's a good chance you are infected, but as long as your immune system's intact, then you're okay. Now, there is a related disease from cats called toxocariasis, and that's a parasitic worm infection we're finding in the United States among the poor. And that's a worm. So what happens is if you go into poor neighborhoods, you see a lot of feral cats and dogs in poor neighborhoods. Almost 100% of them have this worm in their intestines, and they're seeding the environment with eggs in their feces, and the feces are spread all over the poor neighborhoods. Kids come into contact with them, and the worm has the ability to migrate through the brain and cause cerebral toxocariasis. And I think it's an important cause of developmental delays. It's one of those neglected diseases in the U.S. I talk about in the book.
And there's no vaccine for that either?
There's no vaccine for it. And we have very little awareness about it.
Wow. Yeah, I've never even heard of it until just now.
Right.
So
that's not rare. I mean, in some cases, up to 10% of certain populations, like African Americans living in poverty, are infected with it.
And it's primarily pets, or is it rodents as well?
Probably mostly stray dogs. And it's not even pets; it's mostly stray dogs and cats. And this is an example of a neglected tropical disease. Here's a disease of up to 10% of African Americans living in poverty in the United States, and almost nobody is studying it.
Wow.
Right?
And it can affect the way your mind functions.
Right. It's been linked now to developmental delays. So, everybody wants to know why, kids living in poverty have developmental delays, and people just assume it's because they live in deprived environments and that sort of thing. But I think toxocariasis is an important underlying reason for it. And this is an example of a neglected disease. Everybody's heard of Ebola, right? And everyone's worried about Ebola. And the truth is Ebola is never going to come to the United States.
Why is that?
It's never going to be, because it's too difficult to transmit. Unless you have a complete collapse in the health system, we're never going to have Ebola epidemics in the United States. But here's a disease of 10% of African Americans living in poverty, and no one's heard of it, and there's no incentive to study it. So that's why I'm trying to raise awareness about these poverty-related diseases in the United States.
That's crazy. I mean, I don't understand why people don't talk about that one.
Yeah.
That one seems insane.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a no-brainer, right? I mean, and so, but, it's very hard to get people to care about diseases of poverty. I mean, and this is one of the striking things about when I wrote the book was, I've had a lot of success getting people to care about neglected tropical diseases in Africa and worked with the U.S. Agency for International Development to support a package of medicines that's now being administered to over 1 billion people annually. And that, is one of my proudest accomplishments is helping to raise awareness about neglected tropical diseases like we've been talking about, hookworm and schistosomiasis in Africa, Asia, Latin America.
Right.
But the minute I talk about poverty-related diseases in the U.S., the lights go out.
Why is that?
I don't know. I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong. I've had so much success getting people to care about NTDs, neglected tropical diseases in poor developing countries. But, there's been no response to this book. I mean, it is and the estimates that I come up with in the book are we have 12 million Americans live in poverty with a neglected tropical disease. Toxoplasmosis is one of them. Another one is Chagas disease, and the list goes on. And it's been very hard to get people to care about the poor in this country.
That's very strange to me. And I've always said that about the way we treat other countries. We want to send them aid and rebuild these countries, but we don't do anything about these terrible communities that have been terrible in this country for decade upon decade.
Right, and so I try to make the point the world has changed. This old norm of global health, developed versus developing, it still exists, but it's going away. What we're seeing is a general rise in all economies. I mean, some African countries have 8 or 9% economic growth, but it's all leaving behind a bottom segment of society. And so I don't care where you show me poverty, whether it's in Texas or Alabama or Nigeria or Bangladesh, I will show you these poverty-related diseases. And, I know what's her name, AOC, the congresswoman from New York, has talked a little bit about hookworm in Alabama. So last time I was in Washington, I dropped off a copy of the book in her office, but no response yet.
Well, she's probably pretty busy too.
Yeah, she's doing a lot of other stuff.
If you had a magic wand and someone said you could do whatever you want to fix this, what would you do?
So I did meet with a couple of people on the Hill, and they asked me that question, what's the magic wand? And there's a couple of things. One, we need to actually look for these diseases because the problem is the diseases they cause are very subtle, like developmental delays. So that if you're a kid who lives in poverty with developmental delays, the pediatrician doesn't even think to do a test for toxoplasmosis. So we need to raise awareness. We need to go into poor communities across the country and actually take a blood test and actually measure for the presence of that disease or that parasite.
Once you find that disease, what would you do then?
Well, it depends on the disease. In some cases, we have treatments for it. Like the treatment for toxoplasmosis is a 5-day course of a simple pill of albendazole.
And it cures it?
And it cures it. So
really?
Yeah. So we have interventions. So one, doing what I call active surveillance, looking for these diseases. The other one is really trying to understand how these diseases are transmitted. What is it about poor neighborhoods that is facilitating transmission? I think the third problem is the diagnostic tests themselves, because they're very complicated tests. Sometimes, they're done at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Our lab at our National School of Tropical Medicine does a few of them, but it's not like when you go for blood work and your doctor and you get a little lab slip from Quest Diagnostics with the the blood chemistries, the blood counts. There's no box there for toxoplasmosis and Chagas disease. So we need more improved tests, point of care diagnostic tests.
Not just
also.
Improved tests, but just letting people
make it
know
more accessible.
something.
Yeah, and so they don't have to send it off to the CDC or to our National School of Tropical Medicine.
Is there a treatment for toxo?
There is a treatment for toxoplasmosis.
What is it?
It's a paramethamine sulfa drug, but it requires a long treatment course.
How long?
I'd have to look up the number of days. I haven't treated a patient with toxoplasmosis in a while, but
And it kills it effectively?
It can, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was something you kept for life.
Well, if you don't get treated.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And then if you're immune compromised and it comes back, then that's a problem as well.
So most people that have it really don't even know they have it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And actually, and most people who have neglected tropical diseases don't know they have it either. So that in Texas, for instance, we have transmission of a parasitic disease called Chagas disease. It's a cause of heart disease. We, our members of our faculty were actually able to track down individuals who had donated blood, and the Gulf Coast Regional Blood Authority actually found people positive for Chagas disease. They were told to go see their primary health care provider. And though unfortunately the primary health care provider is not educated about these diseases, and they just assume it must be a false positive. So, our faculty had tracked them down and were able to get them into treatment.
And what is the treatment for Chagas disease?
It's an anti-parasitic agent called benznidazole.
And that kills it?
That can kill if you catch it early enough, but sometimes you don't catch it early enough.
So if it becomes systemic, then you have...
Then that's why we're trying to develop a therapeutic vaccine for this disease.
Oh.
But again, it's a therapeutic vaccine for a poverty-related disease, so it's very tough.
God, man.
So the point is these diseases are widespread among the poor, and we just don't pay attention to them.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I think, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, what is it that we just turn our backs on the poor in this country? It's
disturbing.
It's very disturbing.
There's a dismissive attitude.
And they disproportionately affect people of color as well, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so linked to poverty.
Well, also, right, slavery. Yeah, I mean the history of slavery in this country, then the history of systemic racism in places where they just literally would not sell homes to people who are African American. All these things are connected to the contribution of maintaining these impoverished communities, and there's been almost no effort whatsoever, other than the people living in the community trying to do better and raise everybody up.
Right.
There's been no effort whatsoever by the federal government to step in and try to rehabilitate, like a large-scale approach to rehabilitating places like the ghettos of Houston or Baltimore or Detroit.
I thought I knew what poverty. Before I moved to Texas in 2011, I was chair of microbiology at George Washington University, and I thought I knew what poverty looked like. I moved down to the Gulf Coast, and it's a different animal. I mean, the depth and breadth of poverty in the Gulf Coast and the southern part of the United States is just extraordinary. And it's been very hard to get people to want to really take it on and really address these poverty-related diseases.
What do you think the cause of it is? I mean, you've studied this for quite a while.
What, the cause of the neglect?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it something about American exceptionalism or something that we just don't want to admit? We have poor people. I don't know. I wasn't the first to come up, to raise this issue about poverty. When I was in high school or junior high school, I was forced to read a book, and at the time I didn't care about it. It was called The Other America. It was written by a fantastic social activist named Michael Harrington. Who was, I think someone told me he's a very devout Catholic, actually. And he wrote this book called The Other America. It talks about the hidden poverty off the road. And the actual number of people who live in extreme poverty hasn't changed since that book was written in the early 60s. That book was what helped Lyndon, first Kennedy, then Lyndon Johnson, launch the war on poverty in 1964. I dusted off that book, and it still works today. And that's how I start out talking about my book, Blue Marble Health, about that book, The Other America by Michael Harrington.
Yeah, that is a very strange thing, our acceptance of these communities. And I've always said that if you want to make America a better place, the best thing to do is not invade other countries or intervene. The best thing to do is try to rebuild these impoverished communities.
Yeah, well, Gandhi
give people a way out.
Gandhi once said a civilization is judged by the treatment of its minorities, and we're not, by that criteria, we're not doing so well. Our country was visited by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Poverty in 2017, and his numbers came up with we have 19.4 million Americans who live in what's called extreme poverty. That is at half the U.S. poverty line. and roughly around 5 million Americans living on less than $2 a day, the same benchmark you'd use for global poverty everywhere.
5 million.
Yeah. And guess what? Those probably all have neglected tropical diseases.
5 million people.
Just like those living in extreme poverty in Africa and everywhere
5 million
else.
people living on $14 a week.
$2 a day, yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. The University of Michigan Center on Poverty has also shown that we have, I forget the number, 2.7 million families living on less than $2 a day, which is probably about the same as the 5 million number.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And again, this is not a topic that is very popular. I mean, when you see presidential debates, this is not something that comes up.
No, nobody talks about it. And again, even for disease, I mean, what are the diseases we hear about? Ebola, and diseases like that. And sometimes in my frustration, I say, these are imaginary diseases, and yet here we've got widespread diseases of the poor in the U.S. and the lights go out.
You remember when that woman came back from Africa, and she was a nurse, and she had been in some connection contacted with Ebola. She didn't have it, and they wanted to quarantine her.
Oh yeah, and they stuck her out in some cabin on the airport or something
crazy.
It was
like
terrible.
That.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I just thought it was so cruel. And
is it just an ignorance of how it's transmitted?
That's right.
How is it
That's
transmitted?
Right. Well, actually, Ebola, it turns out is the opposite of measles. Measles is one of the most contagious diseases known. It has a reproductive number of 12 to 18. What that means, if a single individual gets measles, 12 to 18 others get it, because the virus hangs around in the environment and it's so easily transmissible.
Hangs around like if you touch this table.
That's right. That's right. Or even in the atmosphere. Oh. So and that's why you get these really large measles outbreaks like you're seeing in Washington State. And usually those are infants under the age of 12 months, not yet old enough to get vaccinated. They're the ones who wind up hospitalized and sick. The Ebola is just the opposite. Ebola is a reproductive number of 2 or 3. So unless you're taking care of a dead or dying Ebola patient or someone who's recently died, because it's only towards the end stage of the disease that you really get large numbers of virus particles in the body, you're not going to get Ebola. So the reason it's being so hard right now to contain in Democratic Republic of Congo is not because it's so highly contagious. It's just that the place is decimated by the collapse in infrastructure associated with civil war. So even though we have now an Ebola vaccine, it's hard to vaccinate everybody.
And how is it transmitted?
Ebola by contact with fluids of somebody with Ebola.
So it has to get into your tissue somehow or another?
Right.
Yeah. Oh. What else should we worry about? You're freaking me out.
Well, the point is a lot of these diseases are solvable if we just put our mind to it. So
or if people are even aware of it. I mean,
one of the things I say in the book is because these diseases are so widespread among the poor in the G20 countries, if we could get the elected or the leaders of those G20 countries together at a G20 summit and say we're really going to do something about the neglected diseases in our own borders, and I'll include the United States, we could get rid of 2/3 of the world's poverty-related neglected diseases right off the bat.
Wow.
So a lot of it is political will, or ignorance, or lack of awareness and political will.
Well, it seems like in this country, ignorance is a big part of it because this is something I've thought about many times, but I didn't know about Chaga. I didn't know about a lot of these other diseases you're describing. Yeah,
no, I mean, so we need to raise awareness about these. That's why I was so thrilled to come here, because I've just amplified the number of people who've heard of this concept of blue marble health, which is a name that I've given a different name from global health to separate it from the two. So, coming on here is so powerful in terms of amplifying that message. Clinical trials, yeah.
Just in clinical trials?
That's right.
Now, wasn't there a Lyme disease vaccine, but the problem was it was actually causing people to get Lyme disease?
So that's to talk about controversial topics. So so there was a Lyme disease vaccine that was developed actually from a colleague of mine at Yale University, and they licensed it, I think it was to GlaxoSmithKline. And they developed it they called it Lymerix. It was the Lyme disease vaccine. And actually most of the studies suggest that it actually worked pretty well. The problem was there were a number of people who felt that the vaccine made them worse, or they said they had chronic Lyme disease, that it wasn't effective. So it was really a market perception problem more than anything else, and ultimately it hurt the bottom line of the company, and they withdrew it from the market.
A good friend of mine's dad got the vaccine and then got Lyme disease. They think he got Lyme disease from the vaccine.
Probably not.
Probably is a weird word for someone with Lyme disease.
That's being nice.
That got it from a vaccine.
No, he didn't get Lyme disease
No
from
way?
a vaccine.
Impossible?
No, impossible, because Lyme disease is caused by the Lyme bacteria, the spirochete called Borrelia burgdorferi. And the vaccine is not a live vaccine. It's a recombinant protein-based vaccine, so it's not possible.
So there's nothing in that vaccine that could have caused this adverse reaction that they directly attribute to that vaccine?
Probably not.
That's again, you're saying probably.
Well, I don't know the patient.
Right.
I haven't examined the injury, so I hate to.
They swear. I mean, that's the narrative at that household.
Well, again, it's reinforced by a lot of negative information out there on the internet.
Yeah, but it's also reinforced by the fact they pulled the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, they pulled the vaccine not because it wasn't working, but because of market perception and all that sort of. And that was a time before the number of cases of Lyme disease have really taken off. So
that seems strange to me because they didn't pull the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine because of perception. Why would they pull the Lyme disease vaccine because of perception?
I think the reason is because the cost benefit equation works a little differently. With measles is a killer disease. Lyme disease was not a killer disease.
But goddamn, it's wrecking people now.
In some cases.
It seems to be connected to a host of other ailments too, correct? Like Lyme disease, it just exacerbates a bunch of different, maybe possibly even existing health issues.
Well, you have to be careful. And this gets into another controversial rabbit hole I'm not sure we want to get into or not today, but the Infectious Disease Society of America, for instance, has come out with a strong statement saying that there's really no such thing as chronic Lyme disease. And the scientific evidence does not support something called chronic Lyme disease, yet there are lots of people suffering with chronic debilitating illness who claim that it's caused by Lyme disease. So this is something that is out there right now.
Why is there a debate? Like, why are they saying that there is no such thing as chronic Lyme disease? What's their evidence?
The evidence is that there's no evidence that they can detect spirochetes in the body. In many cases, people who have had Lyme disease don't have persistent evidence of having antibodies any longer to the Lyme spirochete. So it's a whole different area.
Right, but they do have this chronic inflammation and pain in their joints, and their body starts breaking down.
They have something, but it doesn't seem to be. The Infectious Disease Society of America, which is one of the lead infectious disease bodies in our country, and I'm not an expert on Lyme disease, so I'm not too comfortable going there with you, are saying that there's no evidence that that's actually associated with active infection with Lyme disease.
And how are they describing it, and how are they?
So in other words, what's causing all of these symptoms? Unknown.
But isn't it bizarre that these same people got Lyme disease first and then had all these host of issues afterwards? Well,
I guess part of the problem is in some cases they had Lyme disease first, in some cases they really didn't have Lyme disease. Unfortunately, there are a number of unscrupulous healthcare providers and even physicians out there that are making the misdiagnosis. Either they're making a misdiagnosis of Lyme disease, or in some cases they're actually taking everyone who comes through the door and diagnosing them with Lyme disease.
I'm sure you're aware of the Lone Star tick and the allergy to red meat.
Yeah, right. That's really fascinating, isn't it?
It didn't get really ramped up until Barack Obama in 2010, when it was clear that Barack Obama was a neoliberal corporatist who was going to do the bidding of the war machine and Wall Street and Big Pharma, which is why when the Democrats got control of government, they had the presidency, the Senate, filibuster-proof Senate for a few months, and they had the Congress and the House, and they didn't pass single payer or even a public option. What did we get? We got a right-wing health care plan anyway, which is a giveaway to the pharma and health insurance companies that left out 28 million fucking people.
And infuriated small business owners, infuriated people that had a small practice, that there were doctors and and all sorts of people that
It
were.
was better than what we had. It was a bad solution. It wasn't a solution. What it was a solution for the pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance companies.
How was it better than what we had? In what way?
Well, because before there was pre-existing conditions and you couldn't get coverage, so then that
Right.
was supposed to. So now you could always get coverage. And,
So that part was better. The
yeah,
fact
and-
that you can get covered even if you had an issue.
Right. So then you could go on an exchange and stuff like that. I never had to do that. I always got through my wife's employer. I always had my health insurance, right? And by the way, having health insurance doesn't really mean that much. I got really sick, and
Well, you were talking about this before.
well,
the
this is
podcast.
this is a different thing. But I had an illness that they couldn't diagnose for a few years, and it almost killed me. Right? And
What was it?
It was called hypophosphatemic osteomalacia.
Whoa, that
And-
should be on late night TV, like one of those commercials. Do you have osteopharmaceutical?
Do you have osteo? Side effects include death.
What is it?
It's a bone disease. So my bones were emitting. The bottom line is my bones were. I was having bone disintegration.
Whoa.
So yeah, I used to be much taller. I know that sounds funny, right? It's actually true.
Is that true?
When we met, I was taller than you.
Get the fuck out of here. How tall were you?
I was around 5'10".
And you shrank to 5'8"?
I'm a little under 5'8".
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I know, right? And when that happened, I was going to kill myself.
Did you try to stretch yourself out?
Yes.
Get one of those things they use medieval torture devices. The rack.
So I'm one of those guys who, if I want something, no matter what price I have to pay, physical, whatever, I'll pay it and I'll get that thing I want. Right? Like I'll get it.
But can you mind elaborating on this thing?
Yeah. So I couldn't fix it by stretching. I couldn't fix it.
I was just joking about that. But so what does it do to it's making your bones shrink?
Yeah. So
literally?
it gives you osteoporosis, and then my bones got hollow like an old lady.
Whoa.
And then my spine collapsed when I stepped
What?
off a curb, and too hard. And they didn't know what it was. I don't like talking about it too much, but they told me all different kinds of things. Oh, it's your muscles, it's your nerves, it's in your head, it's in this, and I was limping for a few years, and people were always like, "How you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'll be all right." And because no one likes to hear about anybody else's. And,
Right.
and so and then when that happened, they were like, "Oh no, it's your bones." I was like, "You motherfuckers!" So everybody told me that you should go. So I started going to bone doctors, and everybody told me I should go see this guy, Dr. Charles Sharp. And I called him, and he was expensive, and he didn't take insurance. And so I was like, well, I'll go to someone he trained. So I would go to someone he trained. I wouldn't get any better after 6 months. I go to someone else he trained. He wouldn't get any better. So finally, I was just about to die. And I went to see him. I was going to pay the money and go see him. And he figured out what it was like that. And
Really?
he says to me, he goes, no one nowhere you go, no one's going to know what this is. I go, yeah, I know. I've already been everywhere. And he said, I only saw this once before in 1968. And he says, and you have it.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So then
What causes it?
it was just my own. They didn't know at the time. He thought it was a tumor, but they since figured out it was just my own bones leaching of hormone that makes your body leach the chemicals that I need to make bone. So anyway, this is boring, but
No, it's not boring at all.
So he fixed me, and I started.
How did he fix you?
He just diagnosed me what was wrong and what I needed, and so I need to take supplements, right, for my bones to make bone. Like some people take calcium, so I take this thing called phosphorus because you need phosphorus and calcium and vitamin D to make bone.
Right.
So so we did that, and it was amazingly, he's just an amazing doctor, and he's very right wing as far as I can tell. Right, he doesn't like to talk politics, but it comes up, and he was in the military and all this stuff, and he's just a great guy. I just love him. He's so smart. And he fixed me. So getting back to when I was going to kill myself, so when I stepped off the curb and I shrunk. And I was shrunk even more. They did an operation that gave me about an inch back. I was even shorter, right? So I'm like, holy fuck. I'm like, this is like I wanted to I was literally going to kill myself.
What was the operation they did? They had to put something in your spine?
Kyphoplasty. Mm-hmm.
Like
So
a bar or something like that?
they
keeps it from
cement.
collapsing?
They puff it up and then they stick cement in it.
Oh, Jesus
I know.
Christ.
Anyway, but so I was serious. I was like, I cried one day. I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to stop. And my eyes puffed up like I couldn't see almost. And I was going to do it. I was like, I'll just kill myself. And the only thing that kept me from not killing myself was my manager called me and he said, "Hey, you got that hour special on Comedy Central." And I was like,
Central
"What?"
saved your life.
I was like, "What?" Talk about it was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Wow.
I could not believe. I'm like, "What?" And then I just knew I had to do this special because I couldn't let all those motherfuckers who said I shouldn't move to L.A. and be I couldn't let them win. It was about that. It was about I'm going to show everybody who doubted me and said I was crazy I'm going to show them. I'm going to do this goddamn special. It's going to be fucking awesome. And then I'll kill myself.
Jesus Christ, Jimmy.
And by the time, so I had to get this, anyway, long stories. I had to get this operation in my leg. It was the Bo Jackson surgery.
You got a hip replacement?
And it was the thigh bone was dying. And I went to, so my doctor sends me to this other doctor who invented the operation at USC. And I walk into the office, just like my doctor predicted. He's looking at my chart and he looks up and he goes, "What? I've only seen this in books." Meaning what I have.
Wow.
And I was like, that's what Dr. Sharp said. And so he was going to give me this operation. He goes, "We're going to take this bone out from your shin. We're going to put it in there. And then you can't step on that foot for 6 months straight." And I said, I have an hour special. I'm taping in 8 months. I go, so I can't do this operation. He goes, "Well, your thigh could just snap at any moment." And I go, "I guess that's the chance I got to take."
Holy shit.
Because if I can't do this special, I'm going to kill myself anyway. Yeah, give a fuck, right?
Wow.
So by the time we got to do the special 8 months later, Dr. Sharp's treatment had kicked in, and they didn't know it was going to fix it, but it fixed it. They're like, "It fixed it."
Holy shit. You could have got that crazy operation
Yeah,
for nothing?
For nothing.
Fuck, man. So his treatment is just supplements.
Yeah.
And do you take that to this day?
Every day, every time I eat, I have to take 2 phosphorus pills.
Did you alter your diet?
No, he tells me to make sure I eat meat because I need the whatever it's in it. I need
The stuff?
Yeah, whatever's in it.
Whatever the good stuff is?
He'll look at me like, he goes, "You're from Chicago, right?" And I go, "Yeah." "You eat meat like that."
Like, you're not one of those
Yeah.
fucking plant-eating assholes.
Like, you're not one of those, are you?
Right. I want to ask you about Lyme disease.
Sure.
Lyme disease is a scary one, right? And I mean, so many of my friends on the East Coast have it. It's really terrifying that part of the country in particular seems to be like really badly infected with these ticks that carry this disease. What can people do to prevent that? And what can we? There's no vaccine for Lyme disease, and I know there was at one point in time, but people were having an issue with. A good friend of mine, her dad actually got Lyme disease from the vaccine before they discontinued it. What can someone do to sort of protect themselves?
Yeah.